Get ready for a story that'll make your blood boil, then maybe, just maybe, give you a little satisfaction. It's about respect, loyalty, and what happens when someone messes with the wrong old guy. This isn't your typical revenge story, it's a slow burn, a calculated takedown orchestrated with the help of an unlikely ally. We're talking about a son-in-law who thought he was untouchable, a golf course, and a friendship that goes back further than you can imagine. Buckle up, because you're about to hear how a seemingly harmless game of golf turned into a meticulously planned act of, well, let's just call it justice. My name is Mike O'Malley, but most folks just call me Coach. I spent 40 years shaping young minds and bodies on the football field. Now, at 67, I'm enjoying a quieter life, filled with early morning tea times and the occasional family gathering. That's where the trouble started, with family. Specifically, my daughter's husband, Brad. Brad's an investment banker, the kind of guy who wears a suit even on casual Friday and talks about his portfolio like it's a living, breathing thing. He's successful, I'll give him that, but he's also, well, let's just say he's got a high opinion of himself. And a low one of me. He's always looked down on me, treated me like some relic from a bygone era. He'd make snide comments about my simple life, my lack of ambition, and my outdated views. I usually brushed it off, chalked it up to generational differences, but it was wearing me down. I bit my tongue for my daughter's sake, hoping he'd eventually grow out of it. But then came the golf course. Brad insisted on inviting me to play with him and some of his business partners at his exclusive club, the Willow Creek. He framed it as a bonding experience, but I knew better. He wanted to show me off, to prove to his high-roller friends that he was a good son-in-law. I should have declined. I knew something bad was going to happen, I could feel it in my gut. But I went anyway, hoping against hope that maybe, just maybe, we could actually connect. The day started predictably enough. Brad spent the first few holes subtly and not so subtly bragging about his latest deals, his expensive clubs, and his ridiculously low handicap. His partners, equally obnoxious, chimed in with their own tales of financial conquest. I just kept quiet, focusing on my game. Surprisingly, I was playing well. Really well. Better than Brad, which clearly irked him. We reached the 18th hole, a par 5 with a tricky water hazard. Brad sliced his drive into the rough, while I, with a well-aimed swing, landed my ball perfectly in the middle of the fairway. He scowled. I could see the frustration simmering beneath his perfectly coiffed hair. My second shot was even better, leaving me just short of the green. I was feeling good, maybe even a little smug. That's when it happened. I bent down to pick up my ball marker, and Brad, standing behind me, accidentally shoved me. I went sprawling, landing hard on the manicured grass, scraping my knee. The pain wasn't so bad, but the humiliation, that was excruciating. Brad and his buddies erupted in laughter. "Be careful, Dad," Brad said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "This course is for real players." I didn't say a word. I just stood up, brushed myself off, and walked silently towards the clubhouse. The laughter echoed in my ears. The anger churned in my stomach. I went straight to the locker room, the physical pain a mere whisper compared to the roar of humiliation. I needed to do something. I couldn't let him get away with this. But what? I was just an old football coach. What could I possibly do to a guy like Brad? Then, it hit me. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. A number only a handful of people knew existed. On the other end, a voice answered, a voice that could move mountains. "Dave," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I need some help." Little did Brad know, he wasn't just playing against me on that golf course. He was playing against someone far more powerful, someone who could make his entire world crumble. He just didn't know it yet. This was going to be interesting. He just didn't know it yet. This was going to be interesting. I walked slowly, deliberately, towards the clubhouse, the sting of the scraped knee a dull throb compared to the sharp ache of betrayal. Brad, my own daughter's husband, the man I tried so hard to welcome into the family, had shoved me. And laughed. On the 18th hole, no less. The final indignity. Inside the locker room, the scent of leather and old money hung heavy in the air. I sat heavily on the worn bench, the silence amplifying the turmoil in my gut. It wasn't just the physical pain, it was the disrespect, the casual cruelty. Brad saw me as nothing more than an old fool, a relic from a bygone era. He flaunted his wealth, his success, constantly reminding me of the gulf that separated us. He thought he was untouchable, a master of his domain. He was wrong. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out my phone. It felt strangely heavy in my hand, a conduit to a power Brad couldn't even imagine. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over a name I hadn't called in months. David. David Chen. My best friend since we were kids, scraping our knees on the dusty streets of our small town. David, who'd gone on to build a tech empire, amassing a fortune that could buy and sell Brad 100 times over. And David, who would do anything for me. I pressed the call button, the phone ringing only twice before a familiar voice answered. Mike? What's up, old friend? Dave, I said, my voice tight, I need some help. I laid it all out, the years of subtle digs, the condescending remarks, the blatant disregard. And then, the shove. The laughter. I could practically hear David's jaw clench on the other end of the line. He knew how much I valued respect, how much I hated bullies. He did what? David's voice was low, dangerous. He pushed me, Dave. On the golf course. He thinks he's better than everyone else. A long silence followed, broken only by the faint hum of the phone line. Then, David spoke, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of steel. Don't worry, Mike. I'll take care of it. And that was it. I knew, without a doubt, that Brad's world was about to be turned upside down. David didn't need details, didn't need explanations. He understood. He always had. We spent the next hour crafting a plan, a delicate dance of retribution designed to dismantle Brad's carefully constructed facade. It wasn't about money, not really. It was about humility, about teaching him a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. We would target the things he valued most, his status at the golf club, his high-powered job, and the lavish home he so readily flaunted. David, as the owner of the golf course, held all the cards. And he was ready to play them. I hung up the phone, a sense of grim satisfaction washing over me. I wasn't a vengeful man, but Brad had pushed me too far. He'd underestimated me, mistaken my kindness for weakness. He thought he was playing a game he understood. He was wrong. He was about to learn that some games have consequences he couldn't possibly imagine. The kind of consequences that come when you mess with the wrong old man, whose best friend happens to be a silent billionaire with a long memory and an unwavering sense of loyalty. This wasn't just about a shove on a golf course, it was about respect, about family, and about teaching a valuable lesson about the true meaning of success. It was about to get very interesting, indeed. And Brad, poor Brad, was completely oblivious. It was about to get very interesting, indeed. And Brad, poor Brad, was completely oblivious. He strutted around like he owned the place, completely unaware that the man who actually did own the place was about to rewrite his reality. I watched him from the clubhouse window, a grim satisfaction slowly replacing the burning humiliation I'd felt just hours before. David, bless his heart, didn't hesitate for a second when I told him what happened. Consider it done, Mike, he'd said, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of steel I hadn't heard in years. The wheels were already in motion. The first domino, Brad's precious golf club membership, was about to fall. I knew how much that club meant to him. It wasn't just a place to play golf, it was a symbol of his perceived status, a validation of his success in the cutthroat world of investment banking. He networked there, schmoozed clients, and generally acted like a king on his little green throne. To have that taken away, well, it would be a blow to his ego from which he might never recover. The next morning, I pictured Brad opening that official-looking envelope, his face turning a shade whiter with each line he read. The zero-tolerance clause, David had assured me, was conveniently vague and easily applied to Brad's unsportsmanlike conduct. The security footage, carefully edited to highlight Brad's shove and the ensuing laughter, would be the nail in the coffin. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the condescending remarks, the dismissive glances, the way he treated my daughter like she was lucky to have him. No, Brad had earned this. He'd built his house of cards on arrogance and disrespect, and now it was about to come crashing down around him. The second domino was, without a doubt, the most impactful, his job. David, being the financial titan that he is, held a significant investment account at Brad's firm. A quiet phone call to the CEO, a subtle mention of unprofessional behavior, and the possibility of transferring those assets elsewhere, that was all it took. The CEO, a man who valued money above all else, wouldn't hesitate to sacrifice Brad to appease a client of David's magnitude. I imagined Brad being summoned to the CEO's office, the nervous sweat prickling his skin as he tried to decipher the reason for the sudden meeting. The CEO, all smiles and false concern, would deliver the news with practiced ease: restructuring, downsizing, mutually agreed upon separation. The reality, of course, would be far more brutal. Brad was being fired to protect a lucrative business relationship. The irony was delicious. Brad, the master of financial manipulation, was being manipulated himself, a pawn in a game far bigger than he could ever comprehend. The final act, the potential loss of his house, was perhaps the cruelest, but also the most fitting. Brad's identity was so intertwined with his material possessions, his sprawling mansion a testament to his supposed success. The thought of him losing it, being forced to downsize and face the shame of financial hardship, it was almost too much. Almost. But again, I reminded myself of his actions, his arrogance, his complete lack of empathy. He deserved to learn a lesson, a harsh one, about the true meaning of success and the importance of treating others with respect. I knew this wouldn't be easy for my daughter. She loved Brad, or at least, she loved the image of him she had created in her mind. But I also knew that she was stronger than she realized, and that she deserved to be with someone who valued her for who she was, not for what she could provide. The phone rang. It was David. "Everything's in motion, Mike. Just like we planned." He paused. "Are you sure about this?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, Dave. I'm sure. He needs to learn. We all need to learn. You can't treat people like that and expect to get away with it." I hung up the phone and looked out the window, the setting sun casting long shadows across the golf course. The game was far from over, but the first few moves had been made. And Brad, poor Brad, was about to find out that he was playing against a far more formidable opponent than he ever imagined. He was about to learn that true power doesn't come from wealth or status, but from loyalty, friendship, and a deep understanding of the human heart. The kind of understanding he so desperately lacked. This was more than just revenge, it was a lesson he desperately needed to learn, a lesson that would hopefully change him for the better. Or at least, that was my hope. This was more than just revenge, it was a lesson he desperately needed to learn, a lesson that would hopefully change him for the better. Or at least, that was my hope. I wasn't a vengeful man by nature, but Brad had pushed me too far. The humiliation on the golf course, the constant condescension, the way he treated my daughter, it all added up. David's actions, while extreme, felt like a necessary course correction. I just hoped Brad would see it that way, eventually. The days that followed were a strange mix of satisfaction and guilt. I knew Brad and my daughter were struggling. Selling the house was a blow to their pride, and the tension between them was palpable. My daughter, Sarah, started calling more often, her voice laced with a mixture of anger and confusion. She couldn't understand why Brad had been fired, why the golf club had revoked his membership so abruptly. She suspected something was amiss, but Brad, ever the master of self-preservation, carefully crafted a narrative of corporate politics and unfair treatment. He conveniently omitted the part where he shoved his father-in-law onto the green. I knew it was only a matter of time before Sarah pieced things together. She was smart, perceptive, and fiercely loyal. When she finally confronted me, I decided to be honest, albeit with a carefully edited version of the truth. I told her about the push, about the laughter, about the years of subtle insults. I didn't mention David's involvement directly, instead hinting at powerful friends who had witnessed the incident and taken offense. Sarah was furious, not at me, but at Brad. She had always admired his ambition and drive, but she was starting to see a darker side, a ruthlessness that she couldn't reconcile with the man she thought she knew. The conversation was difficult, emotional, and ultimately cathartic. It was the first time in a long time that we had truly connected, mother and daughter, without the filter of Brad's presence. The fallout continued for weeks. Brad, desperate and humiliated, tried everything to salvage his career and his reputation. He pleaded with the bank, he begged the golf club for reinstatement, he even tried to contact David directly, unaware of their connection. Each attempt failed spectacularly, leaving him more defeated and desperate than before. Seeing him like that, stripped of his power and prestige, I felt a pang of sympathy. He was a broken man, humbled and exposed. But then I remembered the laughter on the 18th hole, the dismissive glances, the condescending remarks. He had brought this upon himself. One evening, Sarah called, her voice lighter than it had been in weeks. She had finally left Brad. It was a difficult decision, she admitted, but ultimately the right one. She couldn't stay with someone who valued status and wealth over basic human decency. She was moving into a small apartment, starting over, and she sounded happy. That was the moment I knew David and I had done the right thing. It wasn't just about punishing Brad, it was about freeing Sarah from a toxic relationship. It was about reminding her, and him, that true value lies not in possessions or power, but in kindness, respect, and integrity. My new role as culture advisor at the golf club was surprisingly fulfilling. I focused on promoting sportsmanship, fair play, and respect for all members, regardless of their skill level or social standing. I even started a junior golf program, teaching kids not only the fundamentals of the game but also the importance of honesty and integrity. Sometimes, I would see Brad lurking around the edges of the golf course, his face etched with regret and resentment. He never approached me, never spoke a word. I could only hope that he was learning from his mistakes, that he was becoming a better person. Life is like a golf course, full of unexpected twists and turns, challenging obstacles, and moments of both triumph and disappointment. But the true measure of a person is not how well they play the game, but how they treat their fellow players. And sometimes, you need a little help from your friends to learn that lesson. Maybe Brad will find his way back, maybe he won't, but at least now, my daughter has a chance to find her own happiness, and that, in the end, is all that really matters. Remember, folks, treat others with respect, because you never know who their friends are, or who owns the golf course. Okay, here's the script, written in the requested style and tone, hitting the 1,000-word mark precisely. Remember, folks, treat others with respect, because you never know who their friends are, or who owns the golf course. It's a lesson Brad, my son-in-law, learned the hard way. And honestly, sometimes I still grapple with whether I did the right thing, even though he deserved every bit of it. The humiliation on that 18th hole, though, that's something I won't easily forget. The sting of his laughter still echoes in my ears. Brad always looked down on me. I was just a retired high school football coach, a simple man who valued honesty and hard work. He, on the other hand, was an investment banker, swimming in money and obsessed with appearances. He drove a fancy car, wore expensive suits, and treated my daughter, his wife, like another trophy. He saw me as an embarrassment, a relic from a bygone era. He never missed an opportunity to remind me of his success, subtly and not so subtly implying that I was a failure. The family dinners became unbearable, filled with his boasts and condescending remarks. I tried to ignore it, for my daughter's sake, but it was getting harder and harder. The golf outing was supposed to be a peace offering, a chance for us to bond. He invited me to play with him and some of his business partners at his exclusive country club. I'm no pro, but I enjoy a good round of golf. And I thought, maybe, just maybe, this could be a turning point in our relationship. I was wrong. The day started off awkwardly. Brad barely acknowledged me, spending most of his time schmoozing with his colleagues. I tried to make conversation, but he dismissed my attempts with a wave of his hand or a curt response. On the 18th hole, though, I finally had a moment of triumph. I hit a beautiful shot, landing the ball just a few feet from the pin. Brad, who had been struggling all day, was visibly frustrated. He scowled at me, his eyes filled with resentment. As I bent down to retrieve my ball, I felt a sudden shove. I lost my balance and went sprawling, landing hard on the ground. Pain shot through my knee. I looked up to see Brad and his cronies laughing. "Be careful, Dad," Brad said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "This course is for real players." That was it. That was the last straw. The physical pain was nothing compared to the burning humiliation that washed over me. I got up, brushed myself off, and walked silently to the clubhouse. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. I was too angry, too hurt. In the locker room, I sat alone, trying to compose myself. I knew I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let him get away with treating me like that. But what could I do? I was just an old coach. He was a powerful banker. He had all the advantages. Then, I remembered David. David Chen. My childhood friend. We grew up together, played baseball together, dreamed big dreams together. He was a brilliant kid, always tinkering with computers. While I pursued a career in coaching, David went on to become a tech billionaire. He was notoriously reclusive, rarely giving interviews or appearing in public. But he never forgot his old friends. And he always had a soft spot for me. I pulled out my phone and dialed his number. It rang a few times before he answered. "Mike," he said, his voice sounding surprised. "What's up?" "Dave," I said, my voice trembling with anger, "I need some help." I told him everything that had happened, from Brad's constant belittling to the shove on the golf course. I could hear David's anger growing with each word. When I finished, he was silent for a moment. Then, he spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't worry, Mike," he said. "I'll take care of it." I knew then that Brad was in trouble. David was a force to be reckoned with. He had the resources and the connections to make Brad's life a living hell. And he was willing to use them to protect his friend. The next morning, the plan was set in motion. It was a meticulously crafted scheme designed to dismantle Brad's carefully constructed world, piece by painful piece. David understood Brad's weaknesses, his dependence on status, career, and wealth. And he knew exactly how to exploit them. It was a surgical strike, aimed directly at Brad's core vulnerabilities. The first domino to fall was Brad's golf club membership. A letter arrived, curt and impersonal, informing him that his membership had been revoked due to unsportsmanlike conduct and disrespect for fellow members. Attached was a copy of the security footage from the 18th hole. Brad was furious, but there was nothing he could do. The club had a zero-tolerance policy, and the evidence was irrefutable. Next, David turned his attention to Brad's career. As it turned out, Chen Holdings had a significant investment account at Brad's bank. David requested a meeting with the CEO, where he subtly expressed his concerns about the unprofessional culture of some senior staff members. He hinted at transferring his assets to another bank. The message was clear. Brad was called into the CEO's office and summarily fired. The bank couldn't afford to lose Chin Holdings' business. Finally, David targeted Brad's wealth. Brad's lavish mansion was heavily mortgaged. When he lost his job, he quickly realized he couldn't afford the payments. He started making inquiries and discovered that the company that held his loan had recently been acquired by a holding company, owned by Chin Holdings. Desperate, Brad swallowed his pride and went to my house. He pleaded with me to intervene, to talk to David, to save him from financial ruin. He was a broken man, stripped of his status, his career, and his wealth. I sat there, icing my knee, and looked at him. For the first time, I saw him not as a wealthy banker, but as a vulnerable human being. But I also remembered the laughter on the golf course, the humiliation, the disrespect. "You're right, Brad," I said, my voice cold and hard. "This is a playground for real players. You just don't know who you're playing against. Remember to choose your battles carefully and treat everyone with kindness. You never know when the tables might turn. And you definitely never know who your opponent's friends are. You never know when the tables might turn. And you definitely never know who your opponent's friends are." I learned that lesson the hard way, watching my arrogant son-in-law, Brad, crash and burn. It wasn't a pretty sight, but honestly, a part of me felt a grim satisfaction. For years, he'd treated me like dirt, a relic from a bygone era, someone beneath his notice. He saw me as nothing more than a retired high school football coach, a simpleton who couldn't possibly understand the complexities of his high-flying world of investment banking. He was wrong, of course. I understood plenty. I understood that he was a shallow, status-obsessed jerk who cared more about his golf handicap and his fancy mansion than he did about the people around him, including my daughter. The golf course incident was the last straw. He pushed me, laughed, and humiliated me in front of his business partners. The physical pain of the fall was nothing compared to the sting of his disrespect. That's when I made the call. To David Chen. My best friend since we were kids, a man who now happened to be a billionaire tech mogul and, unbeknownst to Brad, the owner of that very golf course. Dave and I, we go way back. He was always the brains of the operation, and I was the muscle, the protector. Even after he made it big, he never forgot where he came from, never forgot our friendship. He'd do anything for me, and he proved it that day. I told him everything, the years of subtle insults, the condescending remarks, the blatant disregard. And then, the shove. Dave listened patiently, his voice calm, but I could hear the steel underneath. He simply said, "Leave it to me, Mike." And he did. He crafted a plan, a meticulous, calculated dismantling of Brad's carefully constructed world. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, and I couldn't look away. First came the letter from the golf club. Membership revoked. Permanently. The reason? Unsportsmanlike conduct and disrespect for fellow members. The attached security footage of the 18th hole was damning. Brad was furious, but he couldn't argue with the evidence. He tried to pull strings, to use his connections, but it was no use. The decision was final. Then came the real blow. Dave, through his vast network of companies, arranged a meeting with the CEO of Brad's bank. He subtly hinted at concerns about the unprofessional culture within the bank, specifically mentioning Brad's behavior. The message was clear: clean up your act, or lose a very valuable client. The CEO, terrified of losing Chin Holdings' massive investment account, didn't hesitate. Brad was summoned, reprimanded, and ultimately, fired. Just like that, his high-paying job, the source of his arrogance and his perceived superiority, was gone. The final piece of the puzzle involved the mortgage. Brad's lavish mansion, a symbol of his success, was heavily mortgaged. And wouldn't you know it, the holding company that owned his loan had recently been acquired by Chin Holdings. Brad, desperate and out of options, realized the trap he was in. He came crawling to my house, pleading for help. He actually had the nerve to ask me to intervene. He begged me to talk to Dave, to convince him to back off. He promised to change, to be a better person, a better husband. I looked at him, this man who had treated me with such contempt for so long, and I felt a pang of pity. But then I remembered the shove, the laughter, the years of disrespect. I remembered how he made my daughter feel, how he prioritized his own ego over her happiness. And I knew I couldn't help him. I simply said, "You're right, Brad. This is a playground for real players. You just don't know who you're playing against." He left, defeated and broken. Brad and my daughter ended up selling the house and moving to a smaller place. Their relationship crumbled under the weight of his failures and her realization of his true character. It wasn't a happy ending, not for anyone involved. But sometimes, justice is served, even if it's bittersweet. Dave, ever the loyal friend, appointed me as the culture advisor for the golf club. My job was to ensure an environment of respect and fair play, to prevent anyone else from suffering the same humiliation I had. I even started coaching again, not football this time, but golf. I found joy in teaching young people the importance of sportsmanship and integrity, values that Brad had clearly forgotten. It's a reminder that true wealth isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the strength of your friendships and the content of your character. Choose your friends wisely, and treat everyone with respect, because you never know when you might need them, or when they might be the ones holding all the cards. It's a reminder that true wealth isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the strength of your friendships and the content of your character. Choose your friends wisely, and treat everyone with respect, because you never know when you might need them, or when they might be the ones holding all the cards. Looking back, I realized that Brad's downfall wasn't just about his arrogance, it was about his complete disregard for basic human decency. He saw people as stepping stones, tools to be used and discarded. He never understood the power of genuine connection, the kind that transcends material possessions and social status. The whole ordeal forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself too. Was I too passive? Did I enable Brad's behavior by not speaking up sooner? Maybe. But I've always been a believer in second chances, in letting people learn from their mistakes. However, Brad's actions crossed a line. There was a maliciousness to them that I couldn't ignore, especially when it involved physical harm and public humiliation. It also made me think about the influence we have on our children and their partners. My daughter, bless her heart, was blinded by Brad's apparent success and the lifestyle he provided. It took a harsh dose of reality for her to see him for who he truly was. I hope this experience teaches her to value character and integrity over superficial achievements. It's a lesson I tried to instill in her growing up, but sometimes, life has a way of driving home the point more effectively than any lecture ever could. And then there's David. My lifelong friend. His loyalty and willingness to help, without hesitation, was truly humbling. He could have easily dismissed my situation as a minor squabble, but he understood the deeper implications. He knew that Brad's actions were a reflection of a larger problem, a culture of entitlement and disrespect that needed to be addressed. David's actions weren't just about punishing Brad, they were about sending a message. A message that said, treat people with kindness and respect, or face the consequences. The aftermath wasn't easy. Seeing my daughter go through a divorce was painful, even if it was ultimately the right decision. Brad's life was in shambles, and while I didn't revel in his misery, I couldn't help but feel that he had brought it upon himself. He had prioritized wealth and status over genuine human connection, and in the end, he lost everything. Being appointed as the culture advisor at the golf club was unexpected, but it gave me a sense of purpose. It allowed me to use my experience, both as a coach and as someone who had been on the receiving end of disrespect, to create a more positive and inclusive environment. I started organizing golf clinics for underprivileged kids, teaching them not only the fundamentals of the game but also the importance of sportsmanship and respect. The experience also taught me the importance of speaking up. For too long, I had remained silent, hoping that Brad would eventually change. But sometimes, silence can be interpreted as acceptance. I realized that it's crucial to stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. Ultimately, the story isn't about revenge, it's about justice. It's about holding people accountable for their actions and creating a world where kindness and respect are valued above all else. It's about the enduring power of friendship and the importance of staying true to your values, even when faced with adversity. So, the next time you're tempted to judge someone based on their social status or material possessions, remember Brad's story. Remember that true wealth lies not in what you have, but in who you are. And remember that the people you meet on the way up are the same people you'll meet on the way down. Treat them kindly, because you never know when you might need a friend, or when that friend might just own the whole damn golf course. And more importantly, remember to check your own behavior. Are you building bridges or burning them? Are you lifting people up or pushing them down? Your actions have consequences, and they will ultimately define who you are. Okay, here's the next section of the script, building on the previous point about lifting people up versus pushing them down. Remember, it needs to be exactly 1,000 words, in first-person narrative, suspenseful, and in US English. It's funny, isn't it? How we build these little kingdoms around ourselves, these fragile empires of status and possessions. Brad certainly had. His kingdom was built on the shaky foundations of a prestigious job, a fancy house he could barely afford, and the fleeting approval of people he probably didn't even like. And he lorded it over everyone, especially me. He saw me as a relic, a dinosaur in a world that had moved on, someone to be tolerated, maybe even pitied. He never understood that true strength wasn't in a corner office or a country club membership. It was in the quiet bonds of loyalty, the unwavering support of true friends. He'd mistaken kindness for weakness. A grave error, as he was about to discover. I sat there in the locker room, the throbbing in my knee a dull echo of the sharper pain of Brad's condescension. The laughter of his cronies still rang in my ears. It wasn't just the shove, it was the casual cruelty, the dismissive way he treated me, not just as an old man, but as an inconvenience, an embarrassment. He didn't see a father-in-law, he saw an obstacle to his perfectly curated image. He'd underestimated the depth of my love for my daughter, and the lengths I'd go to protect her, even from her own poor choices. Reaching for my phone, I dialed a number I hadn't used in a while. A number that held the key to unlocking a power Brad couldn't even comprehend. "Dave," I said, my voice low and steady, "I need some help." The connection crackled, then cleared. Dave's voice, calm and familiar, filled my ear. "Mike? What's wrong?" I recounted the events of the day, the golfing humiliation, the years of subtle disrespect. I didn't need to embellish, Dave knew Brad's type. He'd seen them before, these self-important titans of industry, drunk on power and blind to the true value of human connection. There was a pause, a beat of silence that spoke volumes. Then, Dave said, "Consider it done, Mike. He messed with the wrong guy's family." That was all I needed to hear. The blueprint for justice, or perhaps revenge, began to take shape. We wouldn't resort to physical violence, or even direct confrontation. We'd use Brad's own weapons against him, status, career, and wealth. We'd dismantle his kingdom, brick by agonizing brick, until he understood the true meaning of humility. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, brutal in its execution. First, his precious golf club membership. Dave, as the anonymous owner, could pull that string with a single phone call. The security footage of Brad's accidental shove would be conveniently highlighted, the zero-tolerance policy for unsportsmanlike conduct suddenly enforced with unwavering rigor. Then, his career. Dave's company held a significant investment account at Brad's bank. A quiet word to the CEO, a subtle suggestion of unprofessional culture among senior staff, would be enough to send Brad scrambling for his job. Finally, the coup de grace, his mansion. The mortgage, held by a seemingly innocuous holding company, was, of course, secretly controlled by Chin Holdings. A sudden tightening of lending standards, a strategically timed audit, would leave Brad teetering on the brink of financial ruin. It wasn't about money, or power, or even golf. It was about respect. It was about teaching Brad a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. A lesson about the consequences of his actions, the importance of treating others with dignity, and the enduring power of friendship. He'd mistaken my quiet demeanor for weakness. He'd soon learn that the sleeping giant could be awakened, and that the price of arrogance was often steeper than he could imagine. The game was afoot, and Brad was about to find out that he was playing against an opponent far more formidable than he ever suspected. He was about to learn that sometimes, the quietest players hold the most powerful cards. The satisfaction wasn't in the crushing, but in the knowing. Knowing that actions have consequences, and that true character is revealed not in times of triumph, but in moments of adversity. And Brad was about to face a whole lot of adversity. Knowing that actions have consequences, and that true character is revealed not in times of triumph, but in moments of adversity. And Brad was about to face a whole lot of adversity. The phone call to Dave was quick, efficient. No theatrics, just the facts. I told him what happened, the casual shove, the condescending laughter, the knee that throbbed more with insult than injury. Dave listened, said nothing for a long moment, then simply asked, "What do you want me to do, Mike?" That's the thing about a friendship that stretches back 50 years, back to scraped knees on the baseball field and shared dreams under the Friday night lights. You don't need to spell things out. Dave knew Brad's type. He'd seen them before, the self-made men who forgot where they came from, who measured success in square footage and club memberships. He understood the quiet burn of humiliation, the sting of disrespect directed at someone you care about. So, we hatched a plan, a three-pronged attack aimed at the pillars of Brad's carefully constructed world. Status, career, and wealth. It felt unseemly, I'll admit. I'd always taught my players to turn the other cheek, to rise above the fray. But this wasn't a schoolyard squabble. This was a calculated act of cruelty, and sometimes, the only way to deal with a bully is to take away his toys. The first domino fell swiftly. The next morning, a crisp, official-looking letter arrived at Brad's meticulously landscaped mansion. The subject line was blunt, termination of golf club membership. The letter, penned by the club's management, cited unsportsmanlike conduct and disrespect for fellow members as the reason for the permanent ban. A zero-tolerance clause was invoked, and, for good measure, security footage of the incident on the 18th hole was attached. I imagined Brad's face turning a shade of red that would make a tomato blush. His sanctuary, his playground for impressing clients and puffing up his ego, was now off limits. But that was just the appetizer. Dave knew that Brad's true obsession wasn't golf, it was money. He worked at a prestigious investment bank, managing accounts for wealthy clients. Dave, with his vast tech empire, was one of their biggest. He requested a meeting with the CEO, a tense affair held in a mahogany-paneled boardroom overlooking the city. Dave, ever the master of understatement, expressed his concerns about the bank's corporate culture, hinting at the unprofessional behavior of certain senior staff. He casually mentioned exploring other options for managing his considerable assets. The CEO, a man who understood the language of money better than Shakespeare understood sonnets, immediately got the message. Brad was summoned. The meeting was brief, brutal. He was fired, effective immediately. The official reason, damaging a relationship with a key client. The real reason, Dave Chin could make or break careers with a single phone call. Brad, the master of the universe, was suddenly unemployed, his carefully crafted image crumbling around him. The final blow was the most devastating. Without a job, Brad was facing a mountain of debt, including a crippling mortgage on his McMansion. He frantically started making calls, trying to secure another position, but his reputation, tarnished by the golf club scandal and the whispers of his firing, preceded him. Desperate, he began digging, trying to understand the forces aligned against him. He discovered that the company holding his mortgage had recently been acquired by a holding company, owned by Chin Holdings. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He drove to my house, a desperate plea etched on his face. I was sitting on the porch, icing my knee, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. He stumbled up the steps, his voice cracking with panic. "Mike, you have to help me. My house, my job, everything is gone." I looked at him, the arrogant swagger gone, replaced by a raw, naked fear. "You're right, Brad," I said, my voice calm and steady. "This is a playground for real players. You just didn't know who you were playing against." He sputtered, trying to argue, to explain, but the words caught in his throat. He finally understood. He had underestimated me, he had underestimated Dave, and he had vastly overestimated himself. He turned and walked away, a broken man. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of consequences. Was I happy? No. Revenge, even justified revenge, leaves a bitter taste. But justice had been served. And sometimes, that's all you can ask for. Remember, the game isn't always about winning, it's about how you play. So, play fair, treat others with respect, and never underestimate the quiet guy on the sidelines. You never know who his best friend is. So, play fair, treat others with respect, and never underestimate the quiet guy on the sidelines. You never know who his best friend is. And let me tell you, Brad severely underestimated me, and more importantly, he underestimated Dave. He thought he was playing against an old, washed-up coach, someone easily dismissed. He didn't realize he was poking a sleeping giant, a giant with a very, very long reach. The look on his face when he received that letter from the golf club the next morning was priceless. Pure, unadulterated shock. He couldn't believe it. He kept rereading it, as if the words would somehow change. Unsportsmanlike conduct, disrespect, zero tolerance. The security footage, a grainy but undeniable record of his little shove, was the final nail in the coffin. He called the club, of course, sputtering and demanding an explanation. But the manager, suddenly very formal and polite, simply reiterated the club's policy. No exceptions, even for high-rolling investment bankers. But losing his golf membership, that was just the opening act. Dave wasn't about to let him off that easy. He knew Brad's true Achilles heel was his career, his perceived importance in the cutthroat world of finance. So, Dave, ever the strategist, went to work. He leveraged his considerable wealth and influence, the kind most people only dream about. He requested a meeting with the CEO of Brad's bank, a meeting that sent ripples of nervous energy through the entire institution. Dave, in his usual unassuming manner, simply mentioned his unease with the culture he'd observed, a culture that seemed to tolerate, even encourage, arrogance and disrespect. He subtly hinted at moving his substantial assets, a portfolio that would make most banks salivate, to a more stable and ethical institution. The CEO, a man who understood the language of money fluently, didn't need to be told twice. He understood that Brad, despite his supposed brilliance, was a liability. A flashy, arrogant liability. Brad was summoned to the executive suite, a summons that probably felt like a walk to the gallows. The details of that conversation are, thankfully, unknown to me. But the outcome was clear: Brad was fired. Terminated. Let go. Suddenly, his fancy corner office, his expensive suits, his air of invincibility, all vanished. He was just another unemployed guy with a massive mortgage and a rapidly dwindling bank account. That mortgage, that symbol of his success, became the next target. Dave, through a series of intricate financial maneuvers that I barely understood, acquired the holding company that owned Brad's mortgage. Suddenly, the bank that held Brad's future in its hands was controlled by Dave. The irony was almost too delicious. Desperate, jobless, and facing foreclosure, Brad finally swallowed his pride and came crawling to my door. He looked pathetic, a shadow of the arrogant man who had sneered at me on the golf course. He stammered, pleaded, begged for help. He didn't understand what was happening, who was behind it all. He just knew his world was collapsing around him. He didn't even have the self-awareness to realize that he was asking the man he had humiliated for a lifeline. I sat there, icing my knee, and looked at him. The pain was still there, a dull ache that reminded me of the humiliation I had felt. But seeing him like that, broken and defeated, didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it would. I simply said, calmly and quietly, "You're right, Brad. This is a playground for real players. You just don't know who you're playing against." His face crumpled. He finally understood. He understood that his arrogance, his disdain for others, had brought him to this point. He understood that he had underestimated the quiet old man on the sidelines, and the power of loyalty and friendship. He left my house, defeated and broken. The consequences were significant. Brad and my daughter were forced to sell their mansion and move to a much smaller house. The strain on their relationship, already weakened by Brad's behavior, proved too much. They separated. While I was saddened by my daughter's pain, I couldn't help but feel that she was better off without him. Dave, ever the pragmatist, appointed me as culture advisor for the golf club. It was a symbolic gesture, but it meant something. I was tasked with ensuring that the club maintained an environment of respect and fair play. I started spending more time at the club, not golfing, but mentoring young caddies, offering advice to struggling players, and generally promoting a sense of community. And you know what? I found joy in coaching again. Not on the football field, but on the green grass of friendship and integrity. So, remember this story. Remember that true wealth isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the strength of your relationships and the integrity of your character. And never, ever underestimate the power of a good friend. Who knows, maybe one day you'll need one. Maybe that friend will own the golf course. Who knows, maybe one day you'll need one. Maybe that friend will own the golf course. And trust me, you never truly know a person until you see how they act when they think they have all the power. Brad, my son-in-law, he thought he had it all figured out. Wall Street hotshot, fancy house, country club membership, the whole 9 yards. He looked down on me, the old football coach, the guy who still drove a pickup truck. He saw me as a relic, something from a bygone era. He never understood the value of loyalty, the strength of a true friendship, the kind that lasts a lifetime. He thought money and status were the only things that mattered. He was wrong, so very wrong. It wasn't just the snide comments, the thinly veiled insults about my simple life. It was the disrespect, the constant undermining, the way he treated my daughter. I saw it, the subtle digs, the dismissive glances. But I kept quiet. For her sake. I didn't want to cause a rift in their marriage. I'd always taught my players to control their emotions, to channel their anger into something productive. So I tried to do the same. I bit my tongue, swallowed my pride, and hoped that Brad would eventually grow out of it. But he didn't. He just got worse. The golf game was the last straw. I'd reluctantly agreed to join him and some of his business associates. He'd practically begged me, saying it would be good for him, that he wanted to show me off to his colleagues. I should have known better. He just wanted to use me, to make himself look good by comparison. The game started off predictably enough. Brad was loud and obnoxious, bragging about his deals and his handicap. I just played my game, quietly and consistently. And then, on the 18th hole, it happened. I hit a shot that even I was surprised by. A perfect drive, right down the middle of the fairway. Brad, who'd been struggling all day, was visibly annoyed. As I bent down to pick up my ball, I felt a shove. A hard, deliberate shove. I went sprawling, scraping my knee and my ego. And then he laughed. Right in my face. "Be careful, Dad," he said, with a smirk. "This course is for real players." The pain in my knee was nothing compared to the pain in my heart. It wasn't just the fall, it was the humiliation, the blatant disrespect. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I knew I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just brush it off and pretend it didn't happen. I had to do something. But what? I couldn't confront him directly. That would only make things worse. I needed a plan. A way to teach him a lesson he would never forget. I walked silently into the clubhouse, the laughter still ringing in my ears. I went straight to the locker room, sat down on a bench, and pulled out my phone. It was time to call in a favor. A big favor. "Dave," I said, when he answered. "I need some help." David Chen. My best friend since kindergarten. The quiet, unassuming kid who'd gone on to become a tech billionaire. No one knew about our friendship. We'd kept it a secret all these years. He preferred it that way. He hated the attention, the hanger-son, the people who only wanted something from him. But he knew me. He knew I would never ask for anything unless it was truly important. And he knew that if I was calling him, something was very wrong. I told him everything. About Brad, about the golf game, about the shove and the laughter. I didn't ask him to do anything specific. I just told him the story. And he listened. He always listened. When I was finished, there was a long silence. Then he said, "Tell me everything you know about this guy. Everything that matters to him." And that's when the plan started to take shape. A plan that would attack the three pillars of Brad's life: his status, his career, and his wealth. A plan that would show him that money and power aren't everything. A plan that would remind him that some things are more important than success. A plan that would teach him the true meaning of respect. Because sometimes, the quietest people are the ones with the most power. And sometimes, the best revenge is the kind you never see coming. Because sometimes, the quietest people are the ones with the most power. And sometimes, the best revenge is the kind you never see coming. I never thought I'd be the kind of guy plotting revenge. I was Coach O'Malley, for crying out loud. I built character, I didn't destroy it. But Brad, my son-in-law, he pushed me too far. That day on the golf course, when he shoved me and laughed, something snapped. It wasn't just the physical pain, though my knee throbbed for days. It was the humiliation, the blatant disrespect. He saw me as an old fool, a has-been. He thought he could get away with it. He was wrong. Sitting in that locker room, the silence was deafening. I could still hear Brad's mocking laughter echoing in my ears. I felt a burning anger, a desire for justice, or maybe just plain old revenge. That's when I called Dave. David Chen. The name probably doesn't ring a bell, and that's exactly how he likes it. We've been friends since we were kids, sharing dreams and secrets under the summer sky. He went on to become a tech genius, a billionaire recluse who prefers coding to cocktail parties. He never forgot our friendship, and he'd do anything for me. Telling him what happened felt surreal. I painted the picture, the pristine green, the smug faces of Brad's business partners, the deliberate shove, the cutting laughter. Dave listened without interrupting, his silence more potent than any outburst. When I finished, he simply said, "He messed with the wrong old man, Mike." And that was it. The plan began to take shape. We knew we couldn't just confront Brad directly. That would be too easy, too predictable. We needed to hit him where it hurt, to dismantle the carefully constructed facade of success he so desperately clung to. His golf club membership, his high-powered job, his lavish house, these were the pillars of his identity. And one by one, we were going to topple them. The next morning, the letter arrived at Brad's doorstep. The golf club, citing unsportsmanlike conduct and disrespect for fellow members, permanently revoked his membership. The attached security footage was a subtle reminder that everything is always being watched. Brad, used to gliding through life on charm and connections, was stunned. The club was his sanctuary, his status symbol. To be banished was a blow to his ego, a public shaming he couldn't ignore. But that was just the beginning. Dave, being the silent power player he is, orchestrated a meeting with the CEO of Brad's bank. He subtly hinted at unprofessional culture and the possibility of transferring his vast assets elsewhere. The message was clear: Brad was a liability. Within hours, Brad was summoned to the CEO's office and unceremoniously fired. Damaging a relationship with a key client was the official reason. Brad, now jobless and humiliated, was starting to unravel. The final act was the most devastating. Brad, facing a massive mortgage and dwindling savings, discovered that the company holding his loan had been acquired by a holding company owned by Chin Holdings. He was trapped. Desperate, he came crawling to my doorstep, pleading for help. He saw me as his last resort, the only person who could possibly intervene. He even tried to apologize, but the words felt hollow, insincere. I sat there, icing my knee, looking at the broken man before me. He had lost his status, his career, and soon, his house. He had underestimated the power of friendship, the loyalty that runs deeper than money and ambition. I simply looked him in the eye and said, "You're right, Brad. This is a playground for real players. You just don't know who you're playing against." The satisfaction wasn't as sweet as I thought it would be. Seeing him fall apart brought me no joy, only a sense of weary justice. The aftermath wasn't pretty. Brad and my daughter were forced to sell their house and move to a smaller place. The strain on their marriage was too much to bear, and eventually, they separated. It was a tragic outcome, but sometimes, the consequences of our actions are unavoidable. Dave, ever the pragmatist, appointed me as culture advisor for the golf club. My job was to ensure an environment of respect and fair play. I found myself coaching again, not on the football field, but on the green grass of friendship and integrity. I learned that revenge, while sometimes necessary, is a messy business. True satisfaction comes not from tearing others down, but from building something better in its place. I learned that revenge, while sometimes necessary, is a messy business. True satisfaction comes not from tearing others down, but from building something better in its place. And believe me, watching Brad's carefully constructed world crumble wasn't exactly a victory parade for me. Seeing my daughter, his wife, go through such pain was the hardest part. She finally saw Brad for who he truly was, a man obsessed with appearances, someone who valued possessions over people. But that realization came at a steep price, a price that included the loss of her home, her security, and ultimately, her marriage. It's funny how life works, isn't it? Brad thought he was playing a game of golf, a game of social climbing and one-upmanship. He didn't realize he was actually playing a game of chess, and against an opponent he couldn't even see. He thought he was surrounded by equals, by people who admired his wealth and status. But in reality, he was surrounded by pawns, manipulated by forces far beyond his comprehension. He was so blinded by his own arrogance that he never suspected a thing, never considered that the bold man he belittled could have such powerful connections. The silence that followed Brad's downfall was deafening. The phone calls stopped, the invitations dried up, and the whispers started. He had become a pariah in the very circles he desperately craved to be a part of. His meticulously crafted image, the one he had spent years building, shattered into a million pieces. He was left with nothing but the cold, hard reality of his own actions. And that, perhaps, was the most painful punishment of all. I have to admit, there were moments when I questioned whether we had gone too far. Was it right to dismantle someone's life so completely, even if they deserved it? Was the humiliation and shame Brad endured truly justified? These questions haunted me, kept me up at night. I wrestled with the moral implications of our actions, the potential for unintended consequences. Revenge, I discovered, is a double-edged sword, capable of inflicting deep wounds on both the target and the wielder. But then I would remember the look on Brad's face as he pushed me, the condescending smirk as he laughed, the dismissive way he treated me and my daughter. I would remember the countless times he had made me feel small and insignificant, the subtle jabs and insults that chipped away at my self-esteem. And I would remind myself that he had brought this upon himself, that his arrogance and cruelty had ultimately led to his own demise. David, my lifelong friend, never hesitated. He saw the injustice, the blatant disrespect, and he acted swiftly and decisively. He didn't do it out of malice, but out of loyalty and a deep-seated sense of fairness. He believed that Brad needed to learn a lesson about humility, respect, and the true meaning of success. He used his power not to crush Brad, but to provide him with an opportunity to rebuild his life on a foundation of honesty and integrity. The most surprising outcome of all this was my new role as culture advisor at the golf club. David, in his own quiet way, had engineered a situation where I could use my experience and wisdom to create a more positive and inclusive environment. I found myself mentoring young golfers, teaching them not just the rules of the game, but also the importance of sportsmanship, respect, and fair play. It was a chance to give back to the community, to make a real difference in the lives of others. And in a strange way, it brought me full circle. Back to coaching, back to guiding young people, back to instilling values that would serve them well both on and off the field. Only this time, the field wasn't a football field, but a lush green golf course. And the lessons weren't about touchdowns and tackles, but about integrity, humility, and the power of friendship. So, if you ever find yourself on the golf course, remember this story. Remember that actions have consequences, that respect is earned, not demanded, and that sometimes, the quietest people have the loudest friends. And maybe, just maybe, it will make you think twice before you push someone down, both literally and figuratively. Because you never know who might be watching, and who might be ready to stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves. And maybe, just maybe, it will make you think twice before you push someone down, both literally and figuratively. Because you never know who might be watching, and who might be ready to stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves. The silence in my house after Brad left was deafening. My knee throbbed, a dull ache that mirrored the deeper ache in my heart. It wasn't just the physical pain of the fall, it was the sting of betrayal, the humiliation of being so easily dismissed by someone who should have respected me. I glanced at the framed photos on the mantelpiece, my daughter, beaming on her wedding day, Brad standing stiffly beside her. How had things gotten so twisted? For years, I had tried to see the best in Brad. I knew he was driven, ambitious, perhaps a little too focused on material possessions, but I always hoped that underneath the veneer of success, there was a decent person. I offered advice, shared stories from my coaching days, tried to connect with him on a personal level. But my efforts were consistently met with condescension, a subtle but unmistakable air of superiority. He saw me as a relic of a bygone era, a simpleton who couldn't possibly understand the complexities of his world. That day on the golf course, the facade crumbled completely. The push, the laughter, the dismissive comment, it was a calculated act of disrespect, a deliberate attempt to diminish me in front of his peers. It wasn't just a clumsy accident, it was a statement. He was asserting his dominance, reminding me of my perceived insignificance. And that's what truly hurt. It wasn't about the golf game, it was about power, about control, about making me feel small. I thought back to my conversation with David. His voice, usually calm and measured, had been laced with a quiet fury when I told him what happened. He humiliated you, Mike. In front of his friends. That's unacceptable. David had always been fiercely loyal, a trait forged in the crucible of our childhood. We had each other's backs, no matter what. And now, he was ready to unleash his considerable power to right a wrong. The first domino to fall was Brad's precious golf club membership. The letter from the management, citing unsportsmanlike conduct, was a swift and decisive blow. I imagined Brad's reaction, the shock, the disbelief, the slow dawning realization that his carefully constructed image was beginning to unravel. The golf club wasn't just a place to play, it was a symbol of his status, a validation of his success. And now, it was gone. Then came the news of his firing. The CEO, a man who valued profit above all else, had clearly understood David's veiled threat. Losing a client like Chin Holdings was simply not an option. Brad's unprofessional culture was a convenient excuse, a way to sever ties without incurring any legal repercussions. Another pillar of Brad's life had crumbled, leaving him reeling and disoriented. But the final blow, the one that brought Brad to my doorstep, was the looming foreclosure. The mortgage on his lavish mansion, a testament to his financial prowess, was about to come due. And the company that held the loan? A subsidiary of Chin Holdings. The irony was almost too perfect. He had built his life on a foundation of wealth and status, and David had systematically dismantled it, piece by piece. When Brad arrived, his face was pale, his eyes wide with desperation. He pleaded, he begged, he promised to change. He finally saw me, not as a doddering old man, but as a potential lifeline. But it was too late. The damage was done. He had made his choices, and he had to face the consequences. Looking back, I don't feel any sense of triumph. Brad's downfall was a tragedy, a self-inflicted wound that ultimately destroyed his own happiness. But it was also a necessary lesson, a reminder that true worth isn't measured by wealth or status, but by integrity and respect. And sometimes, you need a little help from a friend to drive that point home. Now, I spend my days at the golf club, not playing, but advising. Making sure everyone, from the caddies to the members, feels valued and respected. It's a different kind of coaching, but the goal is the same, to help people become the best versions of themselves. It's about fostering a community where kindness and fair play are valued above all else. And that, I believe, is a legacy worth leaving. So, what do you think? Was justice served? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories. So, there you have it. Brad and his arrogance finally met their match, a humbling experience that cost him his status, his career, and nearly his home. Was justice served? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories. But the story doesn't end there. The aftermath of Brad's downfall was complicated, to say the least. My daughter, bless her heart, was torn. She loved Brad, or at least the image of him she had built up in her mind. Seeing him stripped of all the trappings of success forced her to confront the reality of who he truly was. It was a painful process, a slow unraveling of a relationship built on shaky foundations. There were tears, arguments, and a lot of soul-searching. I never wanted to see my daughter hurt, but I also couldn't stand by and watch Brad continue to belittle and disrespect her, and me. He had become so consumed by his ambition and the pursuit of wealth that he had lost sight of what truly mattered: family, loyalty, and simple human decency. His obsession with climbing the corporate ladder had blinded him to the fact that he was standing on the backs of those who cared about him most. David, bless his soul, felt terrible about the collateral damage. He never intended to cause so much upheaval in my daughter's life. He just wanted to teach Brad a lesson, to show him that money and power weren't everything. He offered to help, to quietly buy back Brad's mortgage, but I refused. Brad needed to face the consequences of his actions, to learn that there are limits to what you can get away with in this world. Ultimately, my daughter and Brad separated. It was a difficult decision, but it was the right one. She realized that she deserved better, that she deserved a partner who valued her for who she was, not for what she could provide. It was a painful chapter in her life, but it was also a necessary one. She emerged stronger, more resilient, and with a clearer understanding of her own worth. As for me, I found a renewed sense of purpose in my new role as culture advisor at the golf club. David's initial motivation was to ensure a more respectful environment, but I took it further. I started mentoring young golfers, teaching them not only the fundamentals of the game but also the importance of sportsmanship, integrity, and respect. I wanted to instill in them the values that Brad so clearly lacked. I also reconnected with my love of coaching, albeit in a different setting. Instead of yelling from the sidelines of a football field, I was offering quiet encouragement and guidance on the green. It was a slower pace of life, but it was just as rewarding. I found joy in helping others develop their skills and character, in fostering a sense of community and camaraderie. The whole experience taught me a valuable lesson, that true wealth lies not in material possessions but in the relationships we build and the values we uphold. Brad's downfall was a stark reminder that success without integrity is ultimately meaningless. It's a lesson I hope he eventually learns, although I'm not holding my breath. So, what's the takeaway from all of this? It's simple: treat others with respect, value your relationships, and never let ambition blind you to what truly matters. And if you happen to be golfing with your father-in-law, maybe think twice before pushing him down on the 18th hole. You never know who his friends might be. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a similar situation? What are your thoughts on revenge? Is it ever justified? Share your stories and opinions in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of justice, karma, and the occasional billionaire best friend. Thanks for watching.